So we have another major development in the Benson case where a DC appellate court struck down the district's ban on magazines. That ruling is still one of the most important Second Amendment decisions that we've seen recently, but now this fight over that ruling is escalating, and it's escalating fast. DC is trying to first fast track essentially an en banc panel rehearing of that ruling, suspend the ruling's impact, while that petition is pending, and create a sense of urgency where the DC Court of Appeals en banc needs to step in fast, block that ruling, and really not even give the plaintiffs an ability to respond. But now the plaintiffs have filed another response, and they're calling that claimed urgency completely overblown. So let's talk about what is going on, what DC is asking the court to do, and how the plaintiffs are now pushing back. Now first, let's quickly recap what happened in Benson, which is critical for understanding what is currently going on in this case procedurally. So the DC Court of Appeals ruled that the district's ban on magazines that holds more than 10 rounds does in fact violate the Second Amendment. Not only did the court strike down the magazine ban itself, but it also vacated several of Benson's related firearms convictions. So those included the possession of an unregistered firearm, the unlawful possession of ammunition, and carrying a pistol without a license. The court essentially said that those convictions were infected by the unconstitutional magazine ban and therefore could not stand. So that was a sweeping ruling with potentially massive implications. And now DC is trying to contain the fallout, and they're trying to do this as fast as possible. The district has now taken several aggressive procedural steps to try to contain this ruling. They have filed a petition for rehearing en banc, filed a motion to expedite that rehearing, and previously also asked to strip the opinion of its precedential effect. So the DC goal really here in this case currently is to move fast as possible and contain the impact of the ruling, and try to do that as quickly as possible and really give the plaintiffs no opportunity to respond to this issue. So here's the newest update of what's currently happening procedurally in this case. The plaintiffs have filed a formal opposition to the district's motion to expedite the case, and their argument is very straightforward. They say that there is no real emergency here, not in the district, and all of these claimed, issues and chaos that is created by this ruling is really overblown. So one of DC's main arguments is that this ruling will open the floodgates to magazines, creating an immediate public safety crisis. But the plaintiffs here push back against that very hard. They point out something very important. The federal government already stopped enforcing this law months ago. And during that entire time, there has been no surge, no crisis, and no chaos. So the district's argument is, overblown, and they simply say that if there was truly an emergency, it would have already happened, and it's not happening, prior to this ruling, and it's still not even happening after. The plaintiffs also emphasize that what the court did here is not radical. It simply brings DC in line with the majority of other, areas and jurisdictions within the country. Most states do not regulate magazine capacity. They don't have these type of restrictions, and these magazines are already widely owned, commonly used, and legal across most of the United States, and we don't see chaos all across the US. So the idea that this new ruling suddenly creates a crisis does not match reality of what we've even seen happen in other states that have, no magazine capacity restrictions at all. DC also claimed that the ruling here is creating confusion for law enforcement officers, but the plaintiffs say that is also very misleading. They explain here in this opposition that the court did not create confusion. The issue and confusion really comes from the district continuing to enforce a system that made it impossible to comply with the law in the first place. So in other words, the problem isn't the new ruling here, it's how the district is responding to that ruling. And this really is a key point. The plaintiffs argue that any confusion or enforcement issues are entirely within the district's control. If the district here wanted to, they could simply stop enforcing the unconstitutional ban and allow the lawful registration of any of these affected firearms. Then the issue would completely disappear. So again, there is no emergency, just a policy choice on the part of the district, and they're the ones really creating whatever claimed emergency or issue that they are pointing to in their petition. The plaintiffs also point out something that undermines DC's argument. If there was truly an emergency, you would already have expected some sort of immediate legislative action on part of the district. but that hasn't happened. You don't have the DC Council, trying to pass emergency legislation or even propose a narrow replacement of this law. Maybe saying, some magazines holding more than 10 rounds are permissible. They have not tried to modify their law at all. So if there was this claimed chaos in emergency that needed to be addressed, you would see some sort of action from the DC Council, but you see none of that. So the plaintiffs argue even the district itself is not acting like this is a crisis by trying to temporarily modify their laws. So now in this case, we have a clear conflict. DC is saying that this situation is urgent, dangerous, and requires immediate court action. But the plaintiffs are opposing that and saying that there is no real emergency and the district is exaggerating to try to fast track the reversal of this ruling. And at the same time, they're trying to get the en banc petition to get reviewed fast. That's currently pending. The motion to expedite is being considered and contested as well. And the request to weaken the ruling is still unresolved. But really, DC wants to do all of this without giving the plaintiffs an opportunity to respond. And this issue right here matters for one key reason. The ruling in Benson is already being used in other challenges. You have the Duncan case at the Supreme Court, which cited to Benson in a supplemental brief. You have the Cheeseman and ANGRPC case in the Third Circuit en banc panel, which also had a supplemental brief on the Benson case. And then you have the PICA challenges out in the Seventh Circuit, which have also cited to Benson. So essentially, the faster that DC can try to contain or reverse this ruling, the less impact it has nationwide. And so DC understands that. So that's why they're claiming that there is this huge chaos, an issue, an emergency that results in the en banc panel having to, override this ruling temporarily or do it as fast as possible and then review this case also as fast as possible. And the plaintiffs clearly understand what DC is doing, and so they're pushing back against that, but they're also pushing the court to be fair, and they're asking the court to give them the same amount of time to respond to the en banc panel petition that DC had when they filed it. DC wants the plaintiffs to not have that opportunity, which shows you really just how much DC is scrambling, how they're so concerned about this ruling, and that's why they're taking these extreme measures. So stepping back, here's where things currently stand. A major appellate decision has struck down DC's magazine ban. The district, in response to that, is trying to fast track that reversal, freeze the impact of that ruling through a process that actually doesn't even exist, and create some claimed urgency for why the en banc panel needs to step in as soon as possible. And the plaintiffs are pushing back against that and saying that there is no real emergency and the law should stand as binding precedent, even if the en banc panel decides to review this case. So this case has now moved beyond just a Second Amendment ruling. It has become a battle over how quickly courts should act on these issues, whether urgency is real in this case or if it's manufactured and overblown by DC itself, and whether this decision continues to shape other cases going forward. So now we're going to wait to see, how does the court, respond to these current petitions and these motions? Are they going to grant that expedited review of the en banc panel petition? Are they going to allow that temporary block of that ruling and just, stall the presidential effect of the ruling while they're reviewing this case? So there's a lot of moving parts right now. But again, this, ruling here and this case here is already impacting other cases. So that is why DC is scrambling to try to stop this as fast as possible, because they do not want this ruling to spread nationwide and impact other cases in other jurisdictions. So that's what's currently going on in this critical Benson magazine ban challenge. As we get more information, as it develops more, I will let you guys know. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.